from the domestic market as bills, it implies that most of Uganda's debt will mature in a short period of time. So this will have a very serious implication on the budget figures in the short run. Therefore, having a very negative implication on the budget as compared to when you look at service delivery versus the taxes. We see a lot of taxes being imposed on the citizens, especially in this COVID-19 era, due to the high debt rollover, whereby a very big chunk is going to debt rollover, but then the service delivery remains a big issue. Then I'll also talk about the other bit, that is the external debt, whereby we see it is also growing. Currently, Uganda's debt as at June 2021 has grown to about 19.46 trillion. This is due to, it is due to the desire of government to combat the spread and also finance the ongoing development projects, especially in the infrastructure side. But then there's a very important point to highlight on the external debt, whereby we see there's a shift from borrowing from the traditional lenders. Those are the multilaterals and bilaterals, but then we go to the bilateral lenders. Those are the commercial, the shift from the multilaterals and bilaterals, then we go to the commercial loans to finance the huge infrastructure development. This has also had a very serious implication on the lenders' debt, because we are tending to debt distress again. When you look at the growing debt versus service delivery, you notice that Uganda is investing a lot of money in paying back debt. Yes, we are not calling upon government to default from its debt, but then if we limit borrowing, or if we look at other options of borrowing rather than commercial banks, whereby there are these other methods, like, say for instance, just as government collected a lot of donations from the public during COVID-19, government could also look at such measures to combat the issue of borrowing at all times in case there is a deficit. There is also domestic revenue mobilization. Right now, we see that there is a lot of untapped into revenue, whereby we are at a level of around 13 to 14% of GDP versus our potential of 18 to about 23% of GDP. This clearly indicates that a lot of revenues have not been tapped into. So if government of Uganda would look at the untapped into revenues, so for instance, looking at these other investors that are being exempted from taxes, and they tap into all these revenues, this would help government to raise money to finance its resources, like to finance its urgent needs. Then yes, I've also talked about the debt repayments and interest payments eating up the biggest chunk of the budget. This is because government has run to borrow from the short-term markets. Those are especially the bills. This has created a very huge burden on government, whereby the debt is going to, the debt will be due in a very short time. Yes, Regina, that's my take.
Thank you, Hilda, for adding your voice to the conversation, where you've emphasized the increasing debt in Uganda, the growing debt, of course, the issues around debt rollover, the gap in service delivery, and how giving us options on how we can mitigate issues around debt by increasing or harnessing our revenue potential that we have. I would then like to call upon Ms. Isabella. You're protected. You're protected, and please share your perspective on some of the issues that have been raised and any other issues from the IMF perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to react. So before I venture into talking about the various debt instruments, I just want us to be reminded that what really matters is how the debt is used. And also, you know, what is the way to obtain it in the cheapest way? What is the cheapest way for borrowing of a country? So when we are, you know, of course, the first best is concessional financing, wherever it's possible. When we are thinking about commercial borrowing, what one has to keep in mind always is that a cost-benefit analysis has to be made. Sometimes external borrowing could be cheaper and it doesn't crowd out the private sector, which is one of the concerns in EAC, but it does come with the foreign exchange risk. So there has to be an analysis at each country level to make these considerations. Of course, when it comes to borrowing in foreign exchange, it is much easier for countries that have revenues in foreign exchange, which is typical for oil exporters. So if there is an exchange rate depreciation, the debt service becomes more expensive, but the revenues are also denominated in that currency. So it becomes a little bit easier. But for what concerns the various instruments, I'm very uneasy when we talk about public-private partnership in terms of debt choices. Public-private partnerships should not be seen as debt instruments. These are contractual agreements we resort to because to facilitate participation of the private sector in government projects, where they have a better expertise, capacity to provide assets, but the more limited borrowing strength. So really, we should resort to PPPs only when these conditions are met. The PPPs entail a risk transfer, but this is a partial risk transfer. Ultimately, the risk is borne by the government, even when it's not explicitly considered in the contract. So imagine, for instance, a highway. In a PPP contract, you would have the two parties share the risks. You know, the government would have the force majeure risk and the exchange rate risk, and the operational risk would be that of the private sector. But what happens when the private company starts to building a highway and then it fails for operational reasons? What happens then? The government still needs a highway. So even if the government doesn't bear that risk, eventually it will have to rebid, select another provider, restart the process, and there are costs involved in this. And these costs always fall back eventually on the government. So we should never think about PPPs as an instrument to hide that, to put that on somebody else's balance sheets, because they're clearly contingent liability for the government. And those rating agencies cannot be fault. They know that. So, I think we have to, consider these instruments. They have potential. They have been instrumental in many countries, but keep in mind the contingent liabilities, present them very transparently, and provision for them in the budgets. So this is what I can say in the moment. Feel free to raise questions. I'm happy to answer.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Isabella, for the clarity. And I saw a comment coming through from Alana that do PPPs really operate in our context, not essentially enable debt to be off? off the books. Most times government essentially takes all the risk. Okay, maybe Alana, you could
Yes, if you can, I'm not sure I really understand. Maybe Alana, you can specify. What do you mean by that they really operate? Whether they have been, whether we know any success stories, or often the government does resort to this instrument precisely because the debt is very high, and this is a way to postpone that payments, to shift the risk. But then, exactly, it's a risk. It can always it can always come back to the government.
Yeah. Hi, Isabella. I actually, I think you're one of the few that has actually essentially pointed out that is this risk that will always come back to the government, because I think the way they are pitched to the populace and the ways in which government does this thing to essentially act like it is not taking on this financial risk at all, right? And we'll have it as a way to really show, like, basically it's often in our context, at least manipulated to be like debt that's off the books. And we've sometimes, and the story is also about how the PPPs end up operating and who ends up paying begin to change, like you see them and the narrative around it. And that's why I think it's if they came out as transparent and say, listen, these are contingent liabilities, and this is what it will mean for us, and this is the risk we're taking on, and that is different. But in the haste to get PPPs passed, it is often poised as a win-win situation. These guys will give us the money, or we won't really, it's not really government money, or you know what I mean? Like, that is how they spin it. Even with some of the ones that are ridiculous, like Luboa, they still don't, they would not, they don't consider that like, I mean, and Luboa, as the way it's, everything about the way it's structured is ridiculous. And as full disclosure, Isa is litigating a case around this, and the stories about how and who bears the risks have changed from the time we started litigation. And so that's what I was trying to get at, that it is then used to hide.
Well, let me tell you, contracts are always, there are always loopholes that you cannot see into the future. You cannot incorporate all the risks into a contract. But even the ones that you're trying to incorporate, you may be wrong. So for instance, the PPP contracts, when you talk about construction of roads, I give that an example. You have you attach to that some revenues that are coming from tolls. Those revenues depend on many things, on economic activities, on the willingness of people to pay or to take the old very bad road that is free. So they're based on some assumption of traffic and willingness to pay that may be wrong or may change over time. So what happens, you have that in the contract. The firm that is supposed to build the highway counts on those revenues to repay the debt. What if this company cannot raise those revenues? The company fails, then the government takes over, or the government doesn't get that revenues. So there is always some risk there, and it is very important that they are transparent and they are clear, and that the government can budget for those risks, that there are some contingencies that it can use if this contract fails, which is not always taken into consideration. Typically, what we recommend countries to have an overarching public-private partnership law that has some goalposts that this law is used across all levels of governments and entities that are able to, that are allowed to negotiate those contracts, so that at least, there is a certain structure when it comes to signing off those agreements. That's something that I don't know whether it exists in all East African countries, but even when the structure exists, the actual contracts can bear risks just because we don't know the future. There is uncertainty.
Thank you, Ms. Isabella. I think it's something for us to
And,
work on
you
to
know,
understand. Okay, Alana, yes?
sorry, can I just respond really quickly to Isabella? I
Okay.
think part of the frustration that has been voiced in this meeting is that while there is this push for this, and ideally a process should be a more sort of critical analysis, balancing, will this be cheaper for us in the long run? Who is best positioned to bear the risk? That doesn't play out practically here. When there is a push, it is happening. Sometimes the push is from the center, from the president, like it was for Lubowa. Other times it is from the funders themselves that are insisting. And we end up with projects that are more costly to us and essentially then what we then deem as hidden debt. And so that's what I think we're trying to underscore. I agree with you the way it works. I just think that with our context, I really don't believe PPPs, at least in the social services, shouldn't even operate at all. You could talk about roads, they may be a bit more sort of, you may have more ability to forecast tolls and so forth, but what happens when it's a hospital? What happens, you know? So all of those things, I think sometimes they're more theoretical than practical in our context as African countries, and they end up costing our governments more.
I think an additional concern is that by not showing transparently all the government's liability, this can contribute to just lowering the debt management effort, because it just seems that there is some fiscal space there that is bigger, but guarantees that can materialize at any point, and then you suddenly have realized that you did not have the fiscal space that you thought you had.
Okay, thank you, Alana and Isabella, for throwing more light on the commodification of public goods, of course, especially the social services, where we feel that they shouldn't be privatized. I know there's another comment coming through from Andrew. What should East African countries do to ensure that both poor external performance and growing external liabilities don't render our economies unattractive for both domestic and foreign investments? Anyone is free to chip in, the panelists, to share your perspective on that. And another question is, who exactly signs for these agreements and how long do they take for them to review? Julius also says that he hopes that we have some MPs on the platform and they're taking notes. No, we don't have, but we will share. Of course, the plan is to share some of these outcomes with them. Any panelists who want to come on board to share their perspective on the questions that have been raised, and any participants, in case you want to ask, please raise your hand. We'll pick on you. Adrian? Irene?
Yes, Regina. So there's a question from Andrew. I'm not sure I understood it well, but I think some of the things, okay, what should East Africa states do to ensure both poor external performance and growing external liabilities don't render our economy unattractive? So I don't know, we've all, I think, heard of the race to the bottom. And I know Siatini has, in the past, not really, a few weeks ago, I think we were having a discussion on harmonization of tax policies within East Africa. So I think we have very nationally, their taxes or their tax policies that are really diverse from each other, from the different countries. And whenever we are talking about regional integration, then how do we ensure that even our fiscal policies are, a little bit aligned such that one country is not disadvantaged or does not lose out on even foreign direct investment simply because of the tax or fiscal policies that exist within a country? Then I think for me, some of the things that we should put in place, there are a lot of things that could attract foreign direct investment, or even when we're talking about issues of debt or financing, there are a lot of factors that could attract that, but trying to have or competing tax competition between countries, I don't think it's one of the things. But if you streamline your economy pretty well, you have very transparent and accountable measures within governments, then you are likely to attract a lot of investment and also support from even international financial institutions that can support growth within your economy, and not necessarily having to do or to smear each other or the different partner states that we have just to get some of these benefits from the international parade. So I don't know if I got that question well, but for me, I think some of the things that we need to put in place are proper mechanisms just to ensure that our policies are not very far from each other, because you're talking about regional integration. If at all that is something that you want to move forward with, which for me will be a good thing, but also just ensuring internally you have very proper transparency and accountability mechanisms, even within the different infrastructures or development projects that we are looking at. Yeah, thank you, Regina.
Okay, thank you, Irene. We have a hand from Robert. Robert, over to you.
Thank you so much, Regina. And I want to really thank our panelists for the insightful engagements. Yes, my name is Robert. I'm from the Environment Shield. I want to comment about two things. One, first of all, to underscore what the previous speaker has just talked about, the need for harmonization, in the East African region, harmonization of policies, harmonization of project roadmaps, and harmonization of, for example, issues that we are struggling with, for example, issues of, common market, issues of currency and all that. So you realize that while there's a push for, for political integration through the East African Legislative Assembly, through the East African Summit, headed by the presidents, but there's need for that integration at the level of the economy. Of course, we appreciate the fact that we are different economies. But look at, for example, Kenya, looking at the GDP vis-a-vis, for example, Uganda and other East African states. There's a difference. But I want you to look at a situation like where the standard gauge railway, if I'm talking about, for example, infrastructure development, the standard gauge railway was launched. But the Kenya, Tanzania, moving far ahead of us. For example, here in Uganda, literally no work has been done. You've been seeing the issue of the pipeline. So I think there is that need, for us to have a deliberate, attempt to harmonize, our project roadmaps, so that we are all moving at least the same direction. But short of that, as we push for all these, issues, there will always be some bit of, challenges here and there, because of we seem to be, as a region, we seem to be giving different priorities at a country level. Yet we are supposed to be deliberately moving the same direction as far as project prioritization is concerned. Secondly, I also want to ask our panelists, what happens to the issue of the public trust doctrine? Because as Alana ably highlighted on the issue, for example, like here in Uganda, about the issue of Rwanda Hospital, where you find that, at the end of the day, once ISA went to court and they saw that there was a legal onslaught, now there was a bit of, finger pointing, trying to shift blame. So we know that as citizens of the East African region, we know that the buck stops with our governments, because you see the government is acting in the public trust of the people, the citizens. They are borrowing all these huge sums of money. You are talking about over 19 point something trillions, for example, for the Ghanaian case, literally hovering over the debt ceiling. So what happens in that case for us as citizens? And I would want really one of the panelists to highlight, what do we do as citizens? Is there a way, we can criminally, hold liable, the government, because they borrow money for and on behalf of the people, but that money does not play the role that money is borrowed for. And at the end of the day, it is us, the people, the citizens, who end up, you saw, for example, in our budget, dear moderator, our budget recently, the money we have allocated to debt repayment is only going to pay interests, not really to pay even the debt, but to pay the interest. So they borrow huge sums of money with high interest rates, with very, very shabby, agreements that have, clauses that don't favor the Ugandan people, but have those issues like, for example, subsidies, and so the ordinary citizen, the taxpayer, is the one who makes up, bearing the burden, of this debt burden. So what do we do as citizens? Is there a way how we can, hold these people? Forget about these civil actions, criminal liability, where we can actually take on these people, because whatever they are doing, they really are doing it for on behalf of their citizens. So for me, that's my concern about the whole concept of the public trust, where we feel as citizens the trust that we've given to the government, because the social contract arrangement is to the effect that the government is representing the interests of the people. But what happens when such a kind of trust has been abused? So that's my concern. Once again, thank you so much. This is a very good engagement, and we hope to continue carrying it on. Thank you. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you, Robert, for emphasizing the need for government to live by the books or what they've committed, and the fact that once trust is broken, it's always hard to gain it. But these are some of the conversations that maybe our panelists, as they conclude, they want to speak to. You could share your insights on responding to Robert, but also broadly what you want to see going forward. Thank you. I'll start with Adrian.
All right, thanks for that. So I'll start by responding to Andrew's question as I wrap up as well. So there is an issue of attracting foreign direct investment there. And I think it's Irene who highlighted the challenge that we have as a result of a race to the bottom, thereby needing African countries, or the East African region, needing harmonization. The speaker had highlighted, let's focus on economic harmonization more than political. But I'm of the view, I'm actually of the view that political harmonization is actually critical to then the overall harmonization, in which we then make our economies competitive and comparative as well. Because there is this concept of the ease of doing business that is promoted by the World Bank. I think for those who would know that, there are a couple of reports, I think should be 2020 or 2019, in fact, going 5 years back, that were recalled because of biases, all right? And I can give an example for Rwanda, which is probably the good child of Africa when it comes to the ease of doing business. And it's problematic in that it then sets already one country ahead of the other or against the other. That's why you will see when we're talking about FDI, there are countries that are said to attract more FDI than others, but yet they're in the same region. And for some, they don't even have the economic means to get that much investment. So that's one thing that I think there is a need for political unison amongst the countries within the East Africa region. That way, and this should be also probably on a political ideology, a uniform political ideology, because once we say Tanzania and maybe Kenya are talking about Pan-Africanism, Rwanda is talking about capitalism, then there is a mismatch already. So in terms of economic integration, we could have challenges there. So I don't know how I'll put it, but political integration is as equal. If we are to then say economically and attracting FDI, we have to have some form of uniformity. So yeah, I think I'll pack it there, because then it's the global political economy that controls how investment gets to be in country X and not Y, and why one is to be ranked maybe 69 out of 280 or something like that, when the other is at 188, that kind of thing. Right. And then in terms of how we hold our government's accountability, I think we do have a broken social contract between citizens and our respective governments, either in East Africa or the African continent as it is, because you see there are persons, especially politically exposed persons, who are above the law. So that then implies that we don't have strong institutions. I think strong institutions are key on mostly all governance aspects of any country's livelihood, rather. So if we can have strong institutions that govern borrowing, right, a loan contraction, that's one good thing. But also we need also strong institutions on the judicial side of things. Yeah, I'm talking about the courts, the police, and also state security institutions as well, because those sometimes actually back governments. That's why we see rogue decisions being made. So I think for this one, I'll pack it here, but maybe as a parting shot, I think what's critical is actually clear policies, strong institutions, and also the role of citizens in playing a watchdog role on what's happening within their respective countries, because the citizen aspect or the citizen manifesto is something we can't do away with, because remember, in some countries, the citizens are the ones that vote in the governments that then go on to contract odious or not well thought out laws. So I think I'll pack it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Over to Ms. Isabella.
Sorry for the delay. I don't have any other comments at this point. Feel free to pass my intervention.
Okay, we can hardly hear you. Isabella, I think we missed you.
Thank you. No, I don't have any comments at this point. Please feel free to pass me.
Okay. Any parting shots from Hilda?
Okay, thank you, Regina. I think I will just respond to the bit of citizens holding government accountable. And when you look at the Ugandan context, it is with the citizens that vote the leaders into power. So we have the right not to vote someone. But then when you look at the projects, especially the loan fund projects, yes, we've entrusted government to borrow on behalf, but then we citizens also have a very big role to play, especially on these loan-funded projects. So for instance, like if government borrows and constructs a road, we as the citizens, have we taken our part to do like what we are supposed to do? So for instance, you find a citizen vandalizing security lights along a road, driving along pavements. We as consumers of public goods, how have we handled the loan-funded projects in place? Because when I drive on a pavement, it implies that this road is going to get worn out in a very short time. So it implies that government will need to incur an extra cost of repairs for these roads. And when you look at our economy, you notice that we don't have money at hand, then government will run back to borrow. Then the other issue is, if we hold our leaders accountable, say for instance, you have to monitor the implementation of this project. At least to an extent, government has been a bit transparent, especially the Ministry of Finance, whereby at least some information is available for citizens. Citizens have a role of monitoring this project. So I, Hilda, maybe in a given constituency, if I see they are constructing this road, but then they're not constructing it in a proper way, I need to tell maybe my MP, I'm like, there is a fault here and there. Then there is another issue of citizens, how can I state it? Like, citizens think it is government's business, yet they also have a very important role to play in the implementation of this point. Then we have also civil society, whereby citizens, we always reach out to various communities, asking them various issues about loan-funded projects, and then the PPPs as well. So I wish citizens were very open on issues of loan-funded projects, such that they can, because some of these organizations have a better voice, they can amplify these issues to the national level, such that they are sorted. Then there is another issue that is really crippling up the community, that is corruption, whereby you find that there's a lot of corruption when this money is acquired. A very big tranche is wasted in corruption. But then who involves in corruption? It is me and you. So it starts with me and you to change this perspective. If you're a government worker, then the public has entrusted you with the authority, maybe to be in the Ministry of Works and all that, and these other ministries. Are you going to be exemplary to the community, or you're also going to rob the nation? So it begins with me and you. Let's all stand up, let's monitor our projects, because these are money and we are going to pay back. So if we don't make these projects, the pinch will still come on us. Back to you, Regina.
Thank you, Hilda. Unfortunately, my internet went off. I'd like to call upon Irene, who will also officially close the meeting, since we are part of the organizers. Irene, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if that is Grace or Regina. Huh? Okay. So I think we've had quite a discussion that has elicited some things that you want to take forth. But for me, first I'll begin with a bit of parting shot before I even talk about the closing. But I think we've discussed at length some of the things that are troublesome, or give us a bit of things to think about when you're talking about economic accountability. But I look at economic accountability issues as quite requiring a bit of expertise. It's not really, I know we're referred to as experts, but personally, I'm not an expert. There are things I learn every day. And I think even as we're looking at our different government institutions, the national treasuries, yes, they have expertise, but I think there is need to just, for proper capacity building within these institutions, so that whenever we're talking about issues of debt restructuring or Eurobond restructuring, then at least there is that expertise within our individual government institutions, just to be able to, to make proper decisions. And as Isabella said earlier, there's a lot of thinking that goes into it. It's not simply about getting debt, but how is that debt even sustainable for a different partner state or this partner state? What are some of the risks? What are the borrowing terms? Is it cost effective? There's so many things to consider. So I think capacity building within our different institutions is also key to consider. But at now citizen or the public's level, I think there is an aspect that has largely been forgotten or ignored. It's not actually forgotten. I think it's deliberately ignored by our different government institutions, the aspect of public participation, you see. So we have all these things that, we just hear, a Eurobond was procured or something came into being that eventually will affect you and me as a citizen. We are the people that are supposed to pay taxes to ensure proper revenue mobilization to repay some of these debt instruments that have been procured. But have we been involved in that procurement? Was there transparency even discussion as we want to put up a dam in this area? How has that reflected? How has the public participated? So I think, and I wish we had even some members of parliament or even policymakers amongst us, just to emphasize the issue of public participation. It is important to involve the public when you're doing something about the public. So you might put up a hospital, but they didn't need a hospital. Probably they needed something else more. They need a school more, but you went ahead and just put up a hospital without even involving the public. So I think that is also key. And I can't emphasize enough the issue of transparency and accountability, and just the role even civil society institutions play to just give the rights holders information to be able to hold duty bearers to account. Sometimes people are not really ignorant, just that they don't know some of these things, how they exist or how they come to be. So it's a call upon us, individuals, academia, within the academia, working on issues of economic accountability or public finance management. It's upon all of us, to ensure that there is enough capacity or awareness within the public to just be able to engage in these issues. And on to the closing now. I know I'm standing between us and lunch, but just really quickly is to thank Siatini and all the organizing partners. We thank UDN. We thank Aphrodite for this session. Thank you very much, Adrian. That was quite an informative presentation that you did earlier. So and also just to call upon all of us, to move the discussions beyond just discussing it here amongst people who already know, and also take the discussion further to policymakers, take the discussion further to even write about it. Academia, I'm glad that we have at least a representative from the academia here. What are we doing beyond just, talking about these issues? Have we written about them? Have we done petitions about these issues to the different parliaments? Have we engaged the East African Legislative Assembly on such issues? So there is a lot to do, but I'm glad that this is part of the beginning. And on that note, thank you very much, Siatini, for bringing us together to discuss, to have this important discussion. Thank you. We also thank the international financial institutions that have been represented here. I know there's a lot that sometimes we might clash, sort of, but we are all driving towards the same agenda. And finally, I think we couldn't be able to gather here today without the support of our donor, Diaconia. So thank you very much for the support. And we look forward to continue engaging this even beyond even on social media, when we meet, when you have different discussions, do we point out some of these issues, or it's just discussed here and that is the end? So that is a challenge to all of us, to take the discussion further and to engage even beyond just this platform. So Regina or Grace, thank you very much. To the ED team, asante sana. In Kenya we say asante sana, Jenna Lunga, for being part of this as well, and to your team. So thank you. Adrian, pass our regards to the Aphrodite team. Thank you. Grace?
Thank you. Thank you, Irene, and thank you, everyone. And a special thank you to Isabella for taking off time to take part in this fully. Thank you all, and we wish you a very good afternoon. Have a good evening and the rest of the afternoon, and enjoy your lunch. Bye.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you all. Thanks for making it. Have a good afternoon. Nice lunch.